Welcome. I'd really appreciate if you could drop a comment with your thoughts and reactions as you listen. Your feedback helps me craft better stories for you. Meg scrolled through her notifications, half-heartedly, dreading another slew of meaningless updates from social media friends sharing viral jokes and cat videos. Her investigative blog addressing economic inequality and government overreach had grown increasingly somber of late, with each expose met only by temporary outrage before society's collective attention inevitably drifted elsewhere. An encrypted message from an obscure username offered a glimmer of purpose. Contact me privately. Have important info on shady deep web org that's harming activists, but must discuss securely. Intrigued, Meg arranged an anonymous meeting in an encrypted chat room. The alias Cell33 appeared, nervous yet determined. This group, the Panopticon, watches everyone on the dark web, said Cell30. 3. They harvest data to track and manipulate dissent. I found posts recruiting hackers to spy on political groups. It's unethical. I looked into them, and now. The connection flickered ominously before resuming. Now I fear for my safety. The truth must get out. Meg assured her source she'd investigate discreetly using Tor encryption to visit the deep web's unlisted sites anonymously. But within days, Cell33 ceased responding, their social profiles deleted without explanation. An activist gone without trace was no coincidence. Donning her virtual disguise, Meg delved into the deep web's twisting labyrinth, passing hubs trafficking stolen data and illegal goods. Simone's trail led to a propaganda site recruiting hackers. Its mission evident: gather intelligence through surveillance and interference. Chilling realized how easily invisible eyes could peer back from the dark corners of this netherworld. Simone's login history revealed exploring further sites run by the enigmatic Panopticon group. But abruptly, it ended without logout. Meg retraced the path carefully under multiple anonymous personas. A site lurked deeper than most, evading visibility. Its database held dossiers on dissidents and power brokers, monitoring movements worldwide through compromised cameras and devices. A lump formed in Meg's throat, seeing Simone's face subtly altered on this digital wanted board. Whoever ran this totalitarian network clearly intended to eliminate witnesses. But how deeply had they infiltrated the real world beyond these encrypted walls? And what lengths would they go to conceal their far-reaching manipulation? Meg hurried from the site, but noticed her exit slowed and browsers hiccuped. Someone was interfering electronically. She logged out hastily to discover strange files on her laptop and warnings in her social media. Someone had breached her systems and sent a chilling message. Stop before you suffer the same fate. Meg purged her devices cautiously, troubled by how easily hidden hackers had penetrated her security. She took comfort in her faith that truth and justice would prevail, yet knew facing such a powerful shadow network required outpacing their digital reach. Retracing Simone's steps under a new alias, Meg passed seedy sites plying weapons and human traffic until finding the propaganda hub again, its mission now clear. Reading divisive lies to disrupt dissent. She noticed patterns in the manipulated posts, their inflammatory rhetoric targeting vulnerable demographics with precision. Deeper laid a sprawling database cataloging IP addresses, geolocations, and personal details in a full-spectrum Panopticon watching all. Chillingly, faces peered from the archives. Journalists, activists, even officials exposed through leaks and hacks, some marked in code she couldn't decipher. Meg delved further through anonymizing networks, each exit node shifting her digital persona. A hidden site facilitated auctions for compromising footage and data, its client's anonymity protecting those peddling secrets and lies. She visualized Simone exploring here, getting too close to exposing such a well-funded operation. Meg retreated hurriedly as strange files began installing onto her machine unprompted. Backtracing the intrusion led to a phantom IP flitting through relay nodes. She scrubbed her system hastily, but noticed changes to social media. Comments edited, friend requests from unfamiliar profiles, fishing for details. The network was stalking her steps, testing her tech skills and limits of patience. Using steganography, Meg embedded her findings in innocuous images and documents, scattering their upload across secure sites under disposable accounts just in case. She felt their watchful presence looming through device cameras and microphones, vigilantly patrolling for threats to their influence. What else had they manipulated under society's nose through their intricate propaganda engines and hacktivist armies serving the highest bidder? The pursuit consumed Meg's nights in an Orwellian fever dream. Each step drew her deeper into their digital panopticon, its sprawling tendrils piercing ever closer to her true identity. She wondered how many had dared peer behind the curtain, finding only silence in return. As the invisible stalkers closed in, Meg raced to uncover enough truth before her journey likewise ended in the darkness. With her devices thoroughly scrubbed, Meg took refuge at an internet cafe, unsettled by how easily the Panopticon had infiltrated her systems. She knew further delving into their shadowy network required subterfuge beyond her technical means. Switching personas, Meg scoured the deep web cautiously, discovering a hidden marketplace facilitating the auctioning of hacked data and exploits. Some listings involved compromised IoT appliances. Their owners' oblivious cameras and microphones were compromised conduits into their lives. She realized with dread how much had likely been gathered on hesitant activists, like Simone exploring too close to the truth. Returning home, Meg found haunting glitches. Voicemails from disconnected numbers, files uploaded to cloud backups she didn't access. Her digital traces were being meticulously stalked. Despite precautions, had they uncovered some sliver of her identity? She recalled activist friends growing paranoid, cutting contacts before vanishing. How many skeletons lay buried in this Panopticon's inescapable grip? Alone in the screen's glow, Meg sifted the clues despairingly when a screech outside raised primal fear. Rushing to see headlights, speeding away, she fought panic and checked surroundings obsessively. Nothing was amiss but her racing nerves. Were unseen eyes manipulating her fears through such subtle acts of intimidation? Days passed under constant vigilance until strange alerts appeared. Social media comments using details only she knew. Calls from numbers unknown that hung up without speaking. The meticulous terror campaign was working, fraying her nerves and isolation. But she refused to let unknown foes dictate her investigative work through psychological warfare. Seeking reassurance in human contact, Meg met a source covertly, relieved by normalcy until noticing a black vehicle idling outside too long after they parted. Paranoia or proof her private life was being spied on. She hurried home through back streets, feeling phantom footsteps matching her pace in the dark. Inside, strange updates appeared on devices, calendar invitations, browser redirects, altered files, and logs showing unseen access. They were broadcasting their omnipresence, toying with her fraying sanity. Meg steeled her resolve, aware that her increasing panic played into their hands. She had to flee this claustrophobic trap to regain perspective and allies beyond their watchful digital nets. But escaping unseen eyes demanded creativity against such a powerful and faceless foe. The future, like her very identity, felt perpetually at the edge of violation. Exhausted yet determined, Meg discreetly packed and printed crucial files, planning her exit from parasitic surveillance. But escaping unseen eyes required creativity against such a shrewd network. After scrubbing devices and leaving false trails, she boarded a series route of buses southward while the Panopticon surely tracked her phantom movements. Seeking refuge in nature's solace, Meg spent fitful nights in remote motels before taking a risky chance, accessing open Wi-Fi from a rural coffee shop under fresh aliases. Expecting traps, she instead found a vulnerability, an unsecured admin portal granting backdoor access, cautiously delving within revealed reams of operational data. From personnel files and financial ledgers to back channels negotiating political interference. Memorizing damning. Finds before the portal inevitably closed. Meg pondered exposure through trusted journalist contacts, but realized even encrypted files could be sourced through analysis of scattered upload patterns. Her only advantage lay in maintaining anonymity while pressuring reform through leaks, revealing the depth of manipulation. Before escaping the coffee shop, Meg discovered more. Dossiers on loved ones going back years, notices of bankruptcies and arrests pushing vulnerable lives to breaking. A surge of adrenaline gripped her, seeing her own life monitored so intimately, from family photos to health records. They were broadcasting how easily they could destroy everything from the shadows, if thwarted. Days passed in restless motels. Meg fine, tuning plans to damage the Panopticon through ethical hackers able to analyze leaked files while concealing her identity. But while preparing final uploads, strange authentication requests appeared from VPNs she didn't use alongside concerning calls to relatives. Her panic rose sensing foreboding presences closing in. That night, ghostly messages appeared on wiped devices, its patronizing tone a violating invasion. We see you, Meg Walker. Cease or suffer the costs of truth. Damning records will surface. Funds freeze, health issues recur. Or accept our offer to disappear quietly with aid. The choice is yours. No one escapes our sight unseen. The Panopticon's message shattered Meg's composure. All her precautions were futile against such a pervasive enemy. Knowing her innermost secrets, she suppressed tears of rage, focusing on protecting innocents from their insidious threats. After scrubbing her trail, Meg braced for the final showdown. Reaching out through hacktivist contacts, she arranged a discreet rendezvous under fresh security. A remote shoreline drew 2 armored vehicles as the director emerged, visage concealed behind mirrored visor and electronic voice. You've caused much trouble, but compliance ends this painlessly. Meg responded with certainty, born of facing her demons. Threats don't wash fear from the truth. Your power stems from darkness, but light always finds cracks. A dark chuckle echoed. We are an inevitability, adapting as society evolves. Freedom remains an illusion under our watchful Panopticon. Then expose yourself. Let citizens decide such overreach's merit. Silence hung heavily before documents emerged. Uncensored files exposing corruption at highest levels. The director vanished amid the revelations. Vehicles peeling away into the setting sun. Meg entrusted troves of sensitive intelligence, detailing the network's global control, to allies amplifying the impact through diverse media, cooperating beyond borders. Shockwaves rocked power structures, long manipulating the shadows as public understanding surged regarding invisible forces, shaping lives through data surveillance and propaganda shaping realities unseen. Meg reflected upon facing her deepest fears, emerging resolute yet weary from the ordeal. Though the Panopticon's tendrils remained entrenched, ripples of her actions spread hope that through vigilance and solidarity, the light of truth may yet illuminate dark recesses where authorities long preyed upon society's unseen. In peaceful obscurity, she took comfort knowing one person's stand empowered many to see through manipulating illusions and fight injustice across this constantly evolving digital frontier. The cold January wind whipped around the nondescript van parked outside a nondescript warehouse on the outskirts of the city. Inside, Special Agent John Davis stared intently at the array of computer screens, displaying a flurry of encrypted code and network activity. "We're a go-in 5 minutes," he said tersely into his earpiece. His team had planned this operation for months, infiltrating servers, following digital trails and piecing together clues. Now, The moment was finally here to shut down the dark web's most notorious black market for good. Known only as the exchange to its users, the anonymous online bazaar had been facilitating the sale of illegal goods and services on the deepest corners of the internet for years. But today, that ended. Davis glanced at his watch. Across multiple time zones and countries, his fellow agents were poised to strike simultaneously. They had tracked the exchange's infrastructure to servers housed in non-jurisdictional territories where extradition was impossible. Taking it all down in one coordinated blow was their only chance. At 4:06 a.m. precisely, Davis gave the signal. Breach on my mark. 3, 2, 1, mark. On his screens, he watched the remote server raids commence through security camera feeds. Masked agents swarmed the facilities, disabling guards with non-lethal force. Within minutes, the servers were unplugged and loaded into evidence trucks. The takedown was successful, but Davis knew their real work had only begun. Terabytes of encrypted user data now had to be painstakingly analyzed for any clue to identify the shadowy figures behind the exchange. He picked up his phone. It's done. Start decrypting everything and have your best analysts comb through it all. Weeks passed as the investigation continued. Davis spent long nights poring over transaction records, messages, and profile details, searching for patterns. One user in particular caught his attention, someone calling themselves Shadow, who appeared to be one of the exchange's most active money launderers. In the days leading up to the raids, Shadow's messages indicated a growing sense of paranoia and urgency to move funds. Now, their digital trail had gone cold, but Davis was determined to find them before they disappeared for good. He focused on Shadow's last known Bitcoin transactions, large withdrawals that could point to an in-person meeting. Stakeouts of banks, cafes, and dead. Drop locations in the following cities. Turned up nothing at first. Davis was starting to lose hope when a message came in from an agent in Prague. A figure in a long coat and mask had been spotted entering an abandoned factory on the outskirts of town. Davis booked the next flight, grabbing his go bag as he raced to the airport. 12 hours later, he arrived exhausted but focused. Under the cover of night, he and local police surrounded the dilapidated building. A lone light shone from a cracked window on the second level. "I'm going in," Davis whispered into his mic. Slowly and silently, he made his way inside. Years of field experience had taught him how to move unseen through the shadows. Up rickety stairs, down a long hallway. Then he spotted the light under a door at the end. He drew his weapon and kicked in the door with practiced precision. A figure in a mask and gloves spun around, dropping a duffel bag full of cash as Davis trained his gun. "FBI! Don't move!" he shouted. But the figure was already bolting for the window. Davis gave chase. A desperate struggle ensued as they grappled at the edge of the broken sill, thousands of dollars fluttering down into the night. With a grunt, Davis gained the upper hand, tearing off the assailant's mask to reveal. Young man, no older than 25, with a look of panic in his eyes. Before Davis could react, gunshots rang out. He shoved the hacker to the floor and returned fire just as two vehicles screeched away into the darkness. When the dust settled, the young man lay bleeding out, a bullet hole in his chest. Davis applied pressure to the wound, but it was no use. As the life faded from his eyes, the hacker whispered, "They're always watching." Then he was gone. Davis cursed under his breath. After so long chasing ghosts in the machine, he had been this close to unmasking Shadow, only to be thwarted at the last moment. Whoever was really pulling the strings of the exchange had made sure to tie up loose ends. But Davis was more determined than ever now to hunt them down before they could cover their tracks. This was personal. As he stared out at the inky night, questions swirled in his mind. Who had gunned down the hacker? Where had they fled to? And how far would they go to protect their criminal empire from being exposed? The chase was only beginning. The morning sun cast a pale glow over the abandoned factory where Davis stood surveying the crime scene. Local police had cordoned off the area, but offered little help beyond that. This was an FBI case now. Back at his hotel room, Davis pored over the clues recovered from the dead hacker's body. A laptop, burner phones, cash, but no identification. Whoever Shadow was, he had erased all digital footprints. All that remained was a receipt from a nearby cafe dated an hour ago. Davis decided to retrace the hacker's steps, hoping someone there may have noticed something useful. At the cafe, the owner recalled a skittish young man matching Shadow's description, who had sat alone, furiously typing on his laptop. A review of the security footage showed the hacker accessing a hidden Tor network, then sending one last message before leaving in a hurry. Davis had the message traced, discovering it was routed through several proxy servers before terminating at a dead-drop email account. Within the inbox were instructions to destroy a USB drive and discard a phone. But the most intriguing message was the last one sent by Shadow himself. "They're coming. I can't hold them off much longer." Davis realized the hackers running the exchange were closing in on loose ends, tying up their operation before disappearing for good. He had to act fast. Examining the hidden message chains, one name kept cropping up: Alexander. Running the name through international databases turned up several persons of interest, including an Alexander Petrov, last known to be operating in Eastern Europe. Davis took the first flight to Moscow and began making discreet inquiries. After a few dead ends, a contact in the Russian security services passed a tip about a man matching Petrov's description, living lavishly in a wealthy suburb outside the city. That night, Davis followed an armored Mercedes down winding country roads to a sprawling estate surrounded by high walls. Lights blazed inside the modernist mansion. Through high-powered binoculars, Davis spotted several men in expensive suits, drinking and laughing loudly around an indoor pool. Could the leader of the exchange really be living so brazenly out in the open? He needed to get a closer look. Under cover of darkness, Davis scaled the perimeter wall, dropping silently into lush gardens. Drawing his weapon, he crept along hedgerows toward the light and noise, keeping to the shadows. Peering through glass doors, he spied a man at the center of it all who fit Petrov's profile. But before Davis could get a positive ID, a guard spotted him and opened fire. Davis sprinted for cover as bullets ripped up the landscaping. An alarm began blaring as Davis raced back to his waiting vehicle. Tires squealed as he peeled away just ahead of armed pursuers. His cover was blown, but he had confirmed Petrov's identity. Now, the chase was truly on to bring down the exchange's kingpin once and for all. The next morning, Davis met with his Russian contacts again. "Petrov has gone to ground," they reported. "But we may have a lead on one of his lieutenants operating a cryptocurrency exchange in Kiev." Davis booked a flight immediately, determined not to lose the trail. In Ukraine, using favors from local law enforcement, he tracked the lieutenant Nikolai to a seedy nightclub. Waiting for nightfall, Davis staked out the entrance, watching the criminal underworld flow in and out. Around midnight, Nikolai emerged drunk and laughing with two scantily clad women on his arms. Davis tailed their Mercedes through darkened streets, following a hunch. Sure enough, the car pulled into an underground parking garage of a nondescript high-rise apartment building. As the group entered the elevator, Davis squeezed in at the last moment, keeping his head down. On the 20th floor, Nikolai and the women got off. But Davis let the doors close and then forced them back open. Stepping stealthily into the hallway, he drew his weapon and took a deep breath. It was time to bring the exchange down, one piece at a time. The old house loomed ahead through the misty rain, its dark windows like empty eye sockets, staring down at Detective John Marshall. He killed the engine and stepped out into the gloom, shivering not entirely from the cold. According to records, no one had lived here for over 50 years, yet fresh tire tracks led up the long gravel drive. Marshall followed their path to the front door, its peeling paint hanging off in long strips. He gave 3 hard knocks, but no answer came. Testing the knob, The door creaked open with a groan. Steeling himself, he entered, flashlight held before him like a talisman against the darkness. Musty air rushed out to meet him, carrying strange scents both familiar and not. Marshall swept the beam around, taking in the foyer's peeling wallpaper and threadbare carpet. An ornate staircase curled up into shadows while doorways on either side beckoned with mysteries best left undiscovered. He chose the room to his left, finding it piled high with boxes and furniture draped in dust sheets. Prying one aside revealed a moth-eaten armchair and end table stacked with papers. Marshall sifted through them, finding lists of indecipherable figures and diagrams depicting bizarre anatomical sketches. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the drafty house. These were no ordinary records. Someone had been conducting experiments here, and not the ethical kind. He bagged several pages as evidence, though what crimes they proved eluded him. Deeper in the room, a curtain blocked another doorway. Marshall yanked it aside to reveal a narrow stairwell leading down. His flashlight flickered, as if sensing his unease, but held steady. Descending into the musty basement, he swept the beam around a large open space filled with workbenches, cabinets, and strange devices whose purpose he dared not guess. In one shadowy corner, a glint caught his eye. Marshall approached and brushed away cobwebs to find a small metal door set into the stone wall. No bigger than a doggy door. Kneeling, he peered through its barred window, but only blackness stared back. A strange, scraping noise sounded from somewhere beyond, raising the hairs on his neck. Marshall tried the door, but it wouldn't budge, as if rusted shut. Rocking back on his heels, he surveyed the room for tools when his light flickered again, dimming to a weak glow. "Not now," he muttered, slapping the casing. It flickered a few more times before steadying. Rising, he spotted a crowbar leaning against the far wall and retrieved it, jamming the curved end into the door jamb. Marshall heaved with all his strength, gritting his teeth as rust flakes rained down. With a protesting screech, the door swung open, releasing a dank waft of stale air. Peering inside, he could just make out stone steps spiraling down into blackness. Marshall leaned in, straining his eyes and ears for any sign of life, but only silence answered. Whatever lay below kept its secrets well. He considered calling for backup, but was alone for miles with no cell service. Curiosity and duty compelled him forward, so Marshall steeled his nerves and started down. The flashlight flickered again as he descended, dimming the claustrophobic passage. "Come on, don't do this now," he muttered, giving it a shake. The beam steadied once more, revealing a low tunnel hewn from raw earth. Marshall crept along slowly, running his free hand along the damp wall, as much for guidance as to steady his nerves. Strange scribblings covered the rock face, etched so deep the grooves felt sharp against his fingertips. He held the light close, discerning bizarre symbols and diagrams amidst a crazed scrawl of writing too minuscule to read. Shivering that had nothing to do with the chill, Marshall hurried on, eager to put the unsettling marks behind him. Ahead, the tunnel forked left and right with no clues to indicate which path led anywhere but further into the earthy womb. Marshall paused, straining his ears for any sound to guide his choice. At first, only dripping water and his own unsteady breathing echoed back. Then a faint scraping drifted down from the left passage. Gripping his light like a truncheon, he turned and crept forward slowly. The scraping grew louder, joined by other noises. A scuttling, a low moan. Marshall rounded a bend and froze, heart pounding. A hulking shape blocked the tunnel ahead, back turned as it scrabbled at the earthen walls with twisted limbs. It froze as well, as if sensing his presence. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the thing began to turn. Marshall raised his light with a shaking hand, dreading what horrors the beam may reveal. Before the light could find its face, a sudden flicker plunged him into absolute darkness. No, no, no. Marshall slapped and shook the flashlight, but it remained dead as the grave. Panic rose in his throat as scuttling noises approached, coming at him fast from the front while the thing's moans echoed from behind. He was trapped between nameless terrors in the pitch-black labyrinth. Whirling, Marshall lashed out with the flashlight, feeling it connect with leathery flesh. A wet shriek pierced the dark, followed by more scuttling that now surrounded him from all sides. Heart pounding, he fumbled for the crowbar at his belt, drawing it with a rasp of metal. Something grabbed his ankle in a vice-like grip. Marshall swung wildly and felt the bar connect with a crunch, causing whatever held him to release with an unearthly wail. He scrambled back the way he came, batting away grasping hands that clutched at his clothes and flesh. Ahead, a dim light flickered, the exit still within reach. Marshall redoubled his efforts, shoving and swinging with renewed strength. More screams and shrieks pursued him up the twisting tunnel as unseen horrors gave chase. He burst from the passage into the basement, slamming the rusted door behind him. Leaning against it, Marshall panted for breath as adrenaline coursed through his veins. His ankle throbbed where something had grabbed him, 3 deep gouges standing out livid against his pale skin. All was silent beyond the door now, but he dared not linger, stumbling up the creaking stairs 2 at a time. Back in the dusty foyer, Marshall leaned over with hands on knees, fighting to steady his racing heart. What unholy experiments had gone on beneath this cursed place, and what nameless terrors still lurked in the lightless depths? He needed to call for backup and have the house sealed, its secrets unearthed before whatever evil festered down there could escape into the world. Reaching for his radio, Marshall remembered with a sinking feeling it had no signal way out here. He was trapped in this place alone with whatever nightmares still prowled the shadows. A creak sounded from above, as if heavy footfalls crossed the ceiling. Marshall drew his pistol, backing toward the front door with rising dread. Whatever lurked in the dark house had found him at last. The rusted hinges screamed as Marshall threw open the front door. He burst into the misty rain, gulping lungfuls of the chill night air. Behind, only silence and shadows filled the foyer now. Had he imagined the creaking footsteps? After what he'd witnessed below, Marshall wasn't sure of anything anymore. All that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between himself and this cursed place. He limped to his car, ankle throbbing in time with his racing pulse. Peeling away down the gravel drive, Marshall risked a glance in the rearview mirror. 2 pinpricks of light stared back from an upstairs window, unblinking and malevolent. He slammed his foot down harder, spraying stones as the house receded into the fog. Back in town, Marshall paced the police station like a caged animal. His report had been met with disbelief by the local officers, who knew the house only as an old abandoned ruin. Now they worked to seal it off as a crime scene while higher-ups debated bringing in specialists. But Marshall wasn't satisfied with waiting. He needed answers, and only one person could provide them. Under cover of night, he returned to the house alone. Floodlights had been set up, banishing the shadows that once shrouded the place. Marshall gave the taped off door a hard shove, splintering the frame. Inside, forensic techs swarmed like ants over a carcass, bagging evidence. "I told you all to stay out until we've had a chance to process," Marshall growled at a young officer blocking his path. "Sorry, sir. Strict orders. The chief wants to be sure this place is locked down tight before anyone goes poking around." Marshall flashed his badge. "I'm the one who found this place. Now get out of my way. I have some unfinished business down below." The kid hesitated, then wisely stepped aside. Marshall descended into the basement, now lit like a stage. Techs photographed and bagged strange devices, while others took samples and swabs. A burly sergeant barred his way to the small metal door. "I said no one goes down there alone. We don't know what's in those tunnels, and it's not stable. Wait for the structural team." "You don't understand. There's someone or something down there, and it wants me. Marshall shoved past, yanking the creaking door open with a grunt. Flashlight in hand, he started down. "Detective, I can't let you." But the sergeant's words were cut off as the passage swallowed Marshall whole. He descended slowly, playing the light over the scribbled walls. Strange that in the glare of floodlights above, these markings seemed almost intelligible, as if on the verge of revealing their secrets. The tunnel forked as before. Marshall paused, straining his ears, then followed a faint scraping sound leading left. Rounding the bend, he froze. A hulking shape hunched in the center of the passage, hacking at the earth with twisted limbs. It froze as well, dropping its crude tools to the dirt. Slowly, it began to turn. Marshall raised his light with a shaking hand, dreading yet needing to see its face. Two gleaming eyes stared back, set deep within a nightmare visage of leathered skin, pulled taut over jutting bone. A lipless mouth split open in a hissing grin, revealing rows of needle teeth. "So, you've come back to me," it rasped in a voice like dry leaves. "I've been waiting, Detective." Marshall leveled his pistol with a steady hand. "It's over. Come with me now, and no one needs to get hurt." The thing cocked its misshapen head, regarding him with cold calculation. "Is that so? But we've only just begun our game of cat and mouse. And this is my domain. Here, I make the rules." It lunged with shocking speed. Marshall fired, but the thing was already a blur, slamming him against the rocky wall. His head spun as the pistol was ripped from numb fingers. It grabbed his throat in a vice, like grip, lifting him off the ground. "You've meddled in my affairs for the last time, Detective. Now you'll join my experiments." Its fetid breath washed over Marshall as consciousness faded. Through the tunnel, shouts and pounding feet approached, along with the crackle of radios. The thing snarled, hurling Marshall aside. His head cracked against the wall and the world went black. When he opened his eyes again, only a scuttling echo remained, receding into the endless maze. Marshall struggled to his feet on unsteady legs, fumbling for his light. A shape loomed out of the dark. The sergeant, eyes wide. "Jesus, are you all right?" We heard shots fired. Behind, techs and officers filled the passage, weapons drawn. "It's still down here. We need to cut off its escape." Marshall pushed past, limping into the twisting labyrinth with the search party on his heels. At every junction he paused, straining his senses. A distant scraping guided their pursuit as the thing fled deeper into its subterranean realm. The tunnels wound on, growing smaller and more claustrophobic. One by one, flashlights and radios began flickering out until only Marshall's remained. He paused at a three-way intersection, uncertain. From the left came a low moan that raised the hairs on his neck. "We should go back," the sergeant urged. "This place isn't safe and we're losing the team. Let the structural engineers map it out with drones first." But Marshall was beyond reason now, driven only by his need for answers and vengeance. "It's toying with us. Stay close and don't lose sight of my light." He turned left without waiting. The passage narrowed until they were forced to crawl on hands and knees. Marshall's light dimmed, but he shook it furiously, unwilling to be submerged in that suffocating dark again. Ahead, a scraping grew louder until it surrounded them from all sides, as if the very walls were crawling. The sergeant grabbed his ankle. "Wait, I think the ceiling's collapsing." Marshall twisted to see a look of horror on the man's face, just before it was swallowed by a cascade of dirt and stone. Darkness engulfed them as the world fell in, burying Marshall under an avalanche of earth. He clawed desperately, lungs burning for air that wouldn't come. Just as blackness closed in, his hand broke free into open space. Marshall grasped blindly until his fingers closed around something solid, a root or pipe, and held on for dear life. With a mighty heave, he pulled himself out of the loose dirt into a small earthen chamber. Coughing and spitting, Marshall swept his light around the cramped space. No sign of the others, only a small circular tunnel continuing on. Had they been buried alive? Was he the only one who'd escaped the collapse? A noise drew his attention to the far side of the chamber. There, scrabbling in the dirt, was the hulking shape of the thing. It froze, turning slowly to regard him with gleaming eyes. A lipless grin split its nightmare face. "Welcome, detective, to my inner sanctum. Here, in the heart of my domain, is where our game shall find its conclusion." It lunged with shocking speed. Marshall swung his light, but it was batted aside, plunging them into absolute darkness. Fingers like steel bands closed around his throat as he was slammed against the earthen wall. He choked and gasped, clawing at his wrists as consciousness faded. Through the roaring in his ears, Marshall heard a faint scraping growing louder, joined by a rumbling from deep below. The thing's grip slackened in surprise, just as the world exploded. Dirt rained down as a deafening roar filled the chamber. His last thought before blacking out was that this place was finally claiming them both. When Marshall opened his eyes again, only dim gray light met his gaze. He lay half buried in loose soil, every muscle screaming in protest. Pushing himself free, he realized the rumbling had been a natural collapse. The entire tunnel system was caving in. But where was the thing? A scraping noise drew his attention. There, trapped under a pile of fallen rock and dirt, was the hulking shape struggling feebly. Its misshapen legs were crushed, bone jutting through torn flesh. It locked eyes with Marshall, an unspoken question hanging in the air between them. He considered finishing it off, ending its depraved experiments once and for all. But vengeance would have to wait. Marshall turned and began clawing his way through the narrow tunnel, scrambling on hands and knees as the world shuddered around him. Behind, the thing's rasping cries faded into the distance, until only the detective's labored breathing echoed in the close space. Ahead, a pinprick of light beckoned. The surface so close, yet feeling infinitely out of reach. Marshall redoubled his efforts, pulling himself through the tight passage inch by painful inch. Just as his strength gave out and blackness closed in again, his grasping fingers broke into open air. He tumbled free onto soft loam, rain pattering down through misty trees. Marshall lay gasping as his vision swam, the forest spinning around him. When it cleared, he saw police lights flashing in the distance and struggled to his feet on unsteady legs. Stumbling through the woods, he emerged onto the gravel drive just as a cruiser skidded to a halt. "Jesus, Marshall, is that you?" Two officers leapt out to help him into the back seat. "We've had every available unit searching the woods since the collapse. What the hell happened in there?" He collapsed against the seat, exhaustion overwhelming him at last. "It's not over. Not by a long shot. Seal that place and call the FBI. We may have a serial killer on our hands." Darkness closed over Marshall then, but behind his eyelids, two gleaming eyes stared out from the abyss, watching, waiting for their final confrontation to come.